This video is an invitation to listen. It's an invitation to listen not to what I'm saying, but to what is trying to be expressed through you. Every one of us is here to create some unique form of value in the world, and we may not believe it. We may be accustomed to being told by the people or the culture in which we're immediately a part of, or to have it suggested to us that we are just a part of a machine. But we're all a unique expression of life. Every single one of us is here to bring something unique to the world. And it doesn't necessarily mean that every single one of us is here to be put on some kind of pedestal or achieve fame and fortune as it's currently expressed in the media. But we're all here to make a difference in some way. We're all here to expand life and the lives of those around us. But seldom do we have a chance to be able to find out what that unique form of expression is when the majority of what we hear out here and in here is competing for our attention, is suggesting that in some way the things that we're aspiring to, even if it's just a sense that we have, isn't worth pursuing because it won't amount to some kind of meaningful income, or it won't amount to a worthy career that meets the approval of the people around us, or whatever the metrics that we have that we place on success. And so what happens is we end up listening, not really paying attention to, I would say, but listening at some level to this narrative that's on repeat that says, here are the things that you should do, and here are the reasons why, and here are the things that are going to happen if you don't do that. And it seems really compelling because everybody else seems to be believing the same thing, but at the same time, all of us, I believe, are in various states of disbelief. You know, we see the things that are happening in the world, and we see the things that people around us are doing, and we get a sense that largely there is some kind of dysfunction in that. There is something in that that doesn't really add up. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't align with what we know at some deeper level to be true, which is that life is not an inherently dangerous experience. We're not here to suffer. We're not here to go through setback after setback and hardship after hardship. And whilst those things are an element of life, they're not the entirety of it. And we have to ask ourselves, many of you I'm sure have, at some point, if this is all there is, why am I here? You know, none of us are born to suffer, yet suffering seems to be such a prominent part of our experience. So how do we break past whatever that narrative suggests for us, or whatever narrative we have inherited from the people around us? And how do we find the voice which exists in us, which is to bring forth some kind of change on any scale? The simplest answer I can give is to learn how to be a better listener. And listening is not a particularly complicated subject to discuss. However, it's widely misunderstood. You know, when we're taught to listen, certainly in school, we're taught that the value of listening is to be able to hear what someone else is saying and remember it. Not to question its truth, not to consider whether or not there is something inside of us that has a deeper ability to perceive what's being said, but just simply to remember it. And then as we start to embark upon things like personal development or communication practices, what we're told is that we have to listen actively. So that's for me to pay attention to something that you're saying and then go, okay, so what you said, and then to repeat the same thing back to you, which has value, but really all I'm paying attention to is your words. I'm not actually hearing what you're trying to communicate. Because you have to remember that the experience that you and I have, and every one of us, cannot be defined by words. The feelings that each and every one of us experiences as we go through life, and the pictures or the words or the sounds or the colours that we perceive, every single one of us perceives differently in ways that words just simply can't convey. And this is why so many people appreciate art, because art can convey beyond words what words often fail to. And so how do we listen to what's behind the words? And how can you hear what's being said, perhaps in this video or in others that you watch, that points to what's essential in that, and then to listen to yourself in the same way, so that greater understanding emerges. One of the things I learned, discovered, was shown, I don't know how to say it exactly, when I first embarked upon my career as a coach. Not that I necessarily call myself that now, but that was the word at the time that made sense, was this ability to deep listen. And I learned from a man called Jack Pransky, who some of you may know, and he's retired now, and I appreciate everything that he has taught me very deeply. And he taught me the ability to listen deeply, to listen openly. And that's to recognize that each and every one of us, when we're paying attention to what someone else or a group of other people are saying, unconsciously what we're doing is we're comparing what's being said to our own narrative, and we're going, does this fit? Do I like this? Do I agree with this? And there's a layer of judgment and opinion that's always in the way of us really taking in the essence of what that person is actually saying in that moment. And if we can recognize that each and every one of us has the ability to think and form opinions, and that this thinking process for most of us is a constant thing, and we see it as this thing that's happening, we can park it to one side. We can, just for a moment, just for a few minutes, we can listen without an agenda. We can listen without the intent to form an opinion, or to compare, or to judge, or to contrast, or even to remember. And what we're listening for is we're listening for a sense that arises inside of us that doesn't necessarily come with words. And some of you may have experienced this when you have been dating, or when you have been in an environment where the thing that you're paying attention to is really, really important to you. And I've heard it said that it's similar to being in a room with the person that you love and adore or hold in the highest regard. And that could be a parent or a loved one. It could be someone who is alive, someone who is dead. It could be a famous person. It could be a political figure or a historic figure. And if you had 5 minutes with that person to just listen to them, how intently would you listen? And what would you hear in what they're saying? Because you wouldn't necessarily hear just the words. You would hear the place from which those words arise. You can only hear those things if you are fully there. And what I mean by that is you take this and you put this to one side and you listen and you get a sense for what that person is saying. And as I started to learn how to do this for others, to hear what was really being said beyond the words, I started to realize that I could listen to myself in the same way. I could listen to those thoughts and those ideas and those beliefs and those struggles and notice the patterns and notice, do you know what, once or twice a month at this particular time, here is how I feel. At this particular time of year, I tend to think about this. I tend to obsess over things, and so on and so on. And by recognizing the patterns, there is a distance which arises. So I begin to be able to see those patterns. I begin to be able to see those things about myself objectively. I separate myself from them, so they are not me anymore. They are things which arise in something that is deeper than that. And then what happens after that is I can sit, much as I do when I'm making these videos, I can sit and I can recognize that whatever it is that's going on in my mind doesn't have to be paid attention to. And I can really deeply recognize and hear the apparent existence of those things and let them be there. And I can choose to focus my attention on something else, which in this case is this camera. And I can allow something, or I can create, let's say, a space for something else to come out that isn't premeditated, that isn't remembered, that isn't scripted, that's alive in this moment. And sometimes it's unexpected. Sometimes the things which are said are unusual. They're never shocking or offensive, at least not now. In the early days, there were things I would say when being listened to that intently by others that would surprise me, that would reveal fears or aspirations or doubts which I had, which I was surprised to recognize the existence of. But when you're being listened to that openly, without judgment or without intent, simply being witnessed, there is a sense of freedom there. And the biggest gift or skill or talent or ability, whatever you want to call it, that I have whenever I'm spending time with people in any capacity, is the ability to put myself to one side and really see and hear what's being said. And if something emerges, an insight of some description, I can communicate that, but sometimes just being there is enough. And all of us can do this for others, and we can also do it for ourselves. But when we're discovering our own voice, our own manner of expressing in the world, I see it, or the image comes to my mind in this moment of like the buried treasure. The old pirate stories of having the buried treasure on the beach or something. The treasure is there. We know it's there, but we don't necessarily know how to get to it. And we have maybe a rough map or something like this. But it's not immediately visible because it's covered by a layer of sand or dirt or something. And it's only when we remove that layer of sand that we get to see the treasure. And listening in this way is very much the same. Sometimes it takes for us to recognize what that layer of sand looks like for us and how it manifests in our lives, to then be able to park it to one side. And it's a very revealing process sometimes, because when we're saying things that we've never heard, or we're bringing up feelings that we didn't even realize existed inside of us, the mind can start to freak out, and it can go, oh, there's something wrong here, you're screwed up, you need help. But it's a passing phase, and it's just something that happens on the way to revealing what's really underneath. But as we understand what that passing phase looks like, and it looks different in all of us, we can more easily tune in to the real voice, to the voice of the intuition or the soul or the heart, or whatever word you want to use, love. And for me, it's always been judgment. It's always been comparison. It's always been jealousy. That person is doing better than me. I'm better than him or her. And that's how it arises in me. For other people, it might be fear. It's like, oh, that person's dangerous. They're going to hurt me. It might be a shame. I'm not good enough. I'm ugly. No one's going to love me. For someone else, it might be related to something physical. It might be the appearance or the gender or the colour of the skin. It doesn't matter what the form is, but it always takes a particular form for each and every one of us. And as we come to understand that, we see how it manifests. We don't have to pay attention to it. Just put it down. And we can understand that it's a mechanism that has been formed in us for us to be able to meet the demands of our lives up to this moment, and to make sense of the things which have happened. And many of us have had some degree of, let's say, what would be considered a traumatic experience or a micro-trauma. Irrespective of the apparent gravity of certain situations, certain things do leave an impression on us, which on others they don't. And so we form a way of being in the world in response to them, which then shapes how we meet future events of the same kind. And so this listening feels at first like a very vulnerable experience, because we're letting our guard down, especially when someone else is doing the listening for us, to us. And many of us find ourselves in the position of, let's say, therapeutic approaches now, where the person who is listening to us is a therapist. And I have nothing against therapy. I would just like to add or observe that much of the time the intention of therapy is to help us with our problems, or to define our problems, or to be centered in some way around the dysfunction that we experience in our life, which has value, but the value unfortunately is limited, because as long as we find ourselves working on that layer of sand or mud or whatever it is, then there is a reduced potential for us to discover the treasure. And if we do discover it, it tends to be by chance. And the value of listening in this way is that you can discover the treasure by default. And of course you can do that for yourself. You don't need to sit here in front of a camera or do journaling. It's simply developing the practice of hearing, and maybe listening is the wrong word, I want to say hearing, to such a degree that you are able to not just perceive what your kind of autopilot sounds like, sufficiently enough to detach from it and recognize when it's there and go, okay, I've heard this voice before, it's not me. Park it to one side and then listen to what's underneath that. For me, in the beginning, this arose not just in conversation with others where I was being listened to or I was listening to them. It was also something which happened in meditation. And there's a point in meditation sometimes where the thoughts, first of all, they seem to be compelling. They are everywhere and overwhelming, it seems. And then there's a point where the thoughts become perceived and you start watching them and they just start passing by. And occasionally you buy into them and start thinking about something and then they pass on. And then they stop and there is just a silence. And occasionally in that silence, in my experience at least, there is a voice which then emerges. And it's almost like a different kind of conversation. And I don't have as much of a monologue inside as I used to, and all of us do, to some degree. But what's there is much kinder. And I've noticed that in those moments of listening, it's almost like there is a different voice speaking to me, speaking through me. It still sounds like John on the inside. But it's much more expansive. It carries with it a much greater sense of possibility, an optimism, a joy, perhaps, a love for the things I have, rather than a condemnation or criticism or a sense of, I need more to be enough. And I've witnessed enough people over the years find that voice inside of themselves also and find ways to express it in the world that I know it's true. I know it to be true. So if you're looking for your own voice, your real voice, the most direct way to it is through the practice of hearing, deep listening. And if it's not something you can necessarily start with yourself, try it with someone else. Don't tell them. But next time you're with your child or your partner, or you're in a work environment, or you're just somewhere where you're in conversation with people or a group of people, when you hear those people speaking, notice the judgments, the comparisons, the preferences, the opinions, the desire to fix. Recognize them, first of all. See that they are there. Allow them to be there, but don't pay attention to them. And then allow your listening to expand so that you're not just hearing the words that the person is saying, you're hearing the space within them that those words arise from. And see what occurs to you. Recognize when you are speaking if you can hear yourself in the same way. Moments when you are saying things and there is something inside of you that goes, this is unkind, this is critical, this is judgmental. And don't be hard on yourself for that. This isn't an exercise in self-condemnation. It's just an opportunity to witness what's already happening by default and to make it conscious. And then see what comes from beneath that. And sure, if you really want to sit in front of a camera, then, I mean, it's a great way to do it. And then listen to yourself back on the replay. You don't have to share it with anybody. But the reason I share these videos is because, first of all, when I'm doing the speaking, I get to tune in to that deeper part of myself, which much of the time is kind of obscured because I go back into my default mode, as we all do from time to time. But then also when I'm doing the editing and I'm watching this back, I can really hear what's being said as if I'm hearing it for the first time. And sometimes that has as much of an impact on me as watching someone else's work. And wisdom is universal. The ability to connect to something new is universal. It's not unique to me or to you or someone on the street. Every single one of us can do that. And the more of us that are able to be open, to be receptive, to understand that that's a possibility, the more of us can find the treasure which already exists inside. As the Buddhists say, the jewel in the lotus. And that's where it is. It's in that space behind the mind. But we can only get there if we recognize that that layer of sand and mud is not the entirety of who we are. It's simply a voice that's been playing on repeat, that hasn't been paid attention to for such a long time, and unquestioned that it's taken to be true. And as soon as we start to peel the layers back and recognize that its truth is apparent rather than absolute, we get to discover what's underneath that, which is, as some people may say, the art of being or living. And if there is an opportunity for you, or there is a desire within you to understand how it feels to be listened to that way, or to learn how to listen more deeply, then do let me know. This is a large part of the practice. This is a large part of the work that I do, to reveal the treasure inside of you and find that way forwards. And all of us are creators. All of us are creating moment to moment, many of us without realizing it. And as soon as we bring the act of creation into awareness, it starts to become a power. That's the meaning of empowerment, as I understand it. Or empowerment, perhaps. And as always, if there's value in this, you hear something for the first time, then please share it in the comments. It's great for other people to see. Please like the video. It lets YouTube know that there's also some value here. And subscribe if you want to hear more of the same. And I'll see you on the next one.